This same weekend, I graduated from UNC Charlotte, summa cum laude after 4 years of scholarships, overnight shifts at a convenience store off I-85, and barely enough sleep to think straight. My parents hosted a dinner for nearly 40 people with candles, peach cobbler, and champagne ready for a toast. None of it was for me. It was for my sister Savannah's engagement. My seats in the arena stayed empty, and the only text my mother sent that night said, "Savannah needed us more. I know you'll understand." For years, I told myself I did. Then, in 2026, after one photo from my Charlotte condo hit Instagram, my mother suddenly remembered how to call me darlin'. What she didn't know was that I already had the payment history, the county records, and proof that the version of me she'd been handing to the family was a lie. So when she called me back to Perry for a family dinner, I didn't go home looking for comfort. I went home carrying a manila envelope. I'm Brenna Whitfield. I'm 30 years old, and before that night was over, nobody in that house was ever going to say my name the same way again. That unraveling didn't start at the dinner table. It started with a late payment notice tied to a loan that should never have been able to follow me this far. The email hit my inbox at 8:14 on a Tuesday night, right when Eli and I were halfway through cake-out Thai at my kitchen counter in Charlotte. I'd kicked off my heels, changed into an old Northline retail analytics hoodie, and was trying to pretend my life felt settled. Outside my windows, the city looked expensive and calm. Inside, the dishwasher hummed, the refrigerator clicked on, and my top floor condo felt exactly like what I had spent years working toward. Mine, quiet, paid for by my own paycheck and my own discipline. No one else's name on the deed, no one else's hand in the lock. Then my phone lit up. Payment past due. It was from the loan servicer on the SUV I had co-signed back in 2022. I stared at the screen long enough for Eli to notice. He set his fork down. That bad? I slid the phone across the counter. Another late notice. He read it once, then again. His face did that thing it always did when numbers stopped being annoying and started being dangerous. How many is this now? Fifth, I said. At least. And your mom still says it's a bank glitch? I gave a humorless laugh. Apparently, every bank in America has chosen my family to malfunction on. Eli looked back at the screen, then at me. The problem isn't just the payment, Brenna. The problem is your name is on that loan. If they keep reporting late, your score keeps taking the hit. You bought this place less than 2 years ago. You do not want noise on your credit file right now. I knew that. I knew it the way you know a bruise before you touch it. Still, hearing it out loud made my shoulders tighten. The condo had closed in September of 2024, $732,000, almost all of it terrifying to say out loud even now. I had put down a big enough payment to keep the mortgage reasonable, and ever since then I had treated that monthly draft like church, on time, every time, no excuses. I had not clawed my way out of a studio apartment and a string of secondhand couches just to let a late car payment from Georgia come back and put its hand around my ankle. Eli studied me for a second. I could tell he was deciding how hard to push. You freeze like this every time something comes from home. I kept my eyes on the granite counter. I don't freeze. He let that sit there between us. Brenna, you absolutely freeze. He wasn't wrong. I just hated that he could see it, because he hadn't known me at 22, standing on a lawn outside UNC Charlotte with a diploma in one hand and an empty row of seats burned into my brain like a brand. He hadn't known me before Charlotte, before promotions and savings accounts and color-coded spreadsheets. He hadn't known the version of me who still believed that if I worked hard enough, behaved well enough, needed little enough, eventually my family would meet me where I was. They didn't. Spring of 2018, I graduated summa cum laude from UNC Charlotte. I had spent 4 years piecing that degree together out of scholarship money, overnight shifts at a convenience store off I-85, and a level of exhaustion that became so normal I forgot it had a name. My mother, Meredith Whitfield, had promised she would be there. She asked what section, she asked what row. My father, Calvin, said he would figure out the drive from Perry, Georgia. Even Savannah, my older sister by 3 years, had sent a heart emoji in the family group chat. The arena was loud enough to shake your ribs. Families were standing, waving, shouting names into the rafters. I crossed the stage, took the diploma cover, smiled for the official camera, and looked straight at the seats I had saved. Empty. Not late, not maybe stuck in traffic. Empty in the way that tells you no one ever intended to sit there. After the ceremony, while everyone else spilled out into the warm Carolina afternoon for pictures and flowers and crying parents, I stood on the lawn, holding my diploma and refreshing my phone like an idiot. The text finally came from Meredith. Savannah needed us more. The engagement party was chaos. I know you'll understand. That last sentence was the whole shape of my life in one line. I know you'll understand. Understand that Savannah's milestones came with backup dancers and catered food and fairy lights in mason jars. Understand that my achievements were only impressive until they inconvenienced somebody. Understand that being the reliable daughter meant never getting picked first. Savannah had always been the center of the frame. At church, at Thanksgiving, in the photo albums on Facebook, in the living room where my mother displayed silver frames and seasonal wreaths, and the exact version of our family she wanted other people to see. Savannah in her dance recital costume, Savannah in homecoming pictures, Savannah with a ring on her finger, and people clustered around her like she was the answer to a prayer. I wasn't mistreated in some obvious movie version of cruelty. Meredith never called me stupid. She never told me I was unwanted. She just had 100 small ways of making me peripheral. A quick, good for you, when I made honors. A change of subject when I mentioned a scholarship. A missing photo. A compliment that landed on Savannah instead. Calvin was easier to love and harder to forgive. He worked, came home tired, kept his head down, and treated silence like a peace offering. He wasn't a cruel man, he was a quiet one. In our house, that was its own kind of betrayal. When I drove back to Perry the week after graduation, the ribbon from Savannah's engagement party was still taped to the cabinet in the kitchen. Half a sheet cake sat on the counter, her ring flashed when she lifted her hand to fix her hair. Meredith didn't apologize. She told me an engagement only happened once and I would have plenty of other accomplishments. Calvin stayed in the den with the television on, volume low, saying nothing. That was the moment I stopped thinking in terms of accidents. I moved to Charlotte that summer and started at Northline in an entry-level role. I lived in a studio with drafty windows and a parking lot view. I lived on meal prep and secondhand furniture. I did good work, then better work, then the work nobody else wanted because it was messy and complicated and impossible to explain in one slide. Junior analyst became analyst, then senior analyst, then manager. There was no miracle in it, just time, discipline, and a very long habit of not spending money on myself. In October 2020, Meredith called. Her voice was thin and tired in that way that always made me feel like a bad person before she'd even asked for anything. The mortgage is crushing us, Brenna. Your daddy's back's worse. Everything's gone up. I don't know how much longer we can keep this house. I asked how much she needed. $12.50 a month, she said immediately, just until we get through this stretch. I looked around my tiny apartment at the folding table I used as a desk and dinner surface and thought about Willow Creek Road, about the house I grew up in, about my father driving to work in pain and my mother saying they were running out of road. I can start next month, I said. There was relief in her voice, warm and immediate. I knew you could count on me. Back in my kitchen in Charlotte, 8 years later, Eli leaned on the counter and folded his arms. Have you actually seen the mortgage statement? I opened my mouth, then closed it. No, I said. He nodded once, not surprised. And there it was. Not a memory this time, not a hurt feeling I could explain away, just one clean question hanging in my kitchen, changing the shape of everything. For the first time in my life, I let myself think maybe this wasn't only favoritism. Maybe it was something built on top of that, something older, quieter, and a lot more expensive. Eli turned his laptop toward me and opened a blank note. Okay, he said. Let's do this like grown adults with receipts. I almost smiled. Almost. He tapped the keys once. When did your mom first ask for mortgage help? Near the end of 2020. When did you start sending it? November 2020. $1,250. Every month? I nodded, unless she called crying about something extra, then more. He looked up. How often is more? Not every month. End of the year, school stuff for the girls a couple of times. Once when my dad's back went out worse than usual. Once when Savannah said daycare was killing them. He typed while I talked. Date, amount, note. He asked about everything. The car, my condo, my first late notice, the month my score dropped, the month I noticed my mother had stopped sounding grateful and started sounding entitled. It was strange, seeing my life reduced to facts instead of feelings. For years, I had moved the second the phone rang. My mother sighed, I opened my banking app. She mentioned my dad's back, I transferred money before she finished the sentence. She said Savannah was drowning, I told myself family was supposed to show up. I had never once stopped long enough to ask whether there had actually been water in the room. Eli scrolled through my checking history. November 2020, December, January, every month after that, $1,250 to Meredith Whitfield. Same amount, same rhythm, like rent on a place I didn't live in anymore. He whistled softly through his teeth. What? You were in your mid-20s and already subsidizing another household, he said. That's not normal. In my family, it was. He gave me a look. In your family, not normal just happened long enough to start feeling familiar. I got up and rinsed our half-empty takeout containers just to have something to do with my hands. The dishwasher was still warm when I shut it. Eli kept working. Walk me through the SUV, he said. I leaned back against the counter. Summer of 2022, my mom called and said my dad's sedan was dying. She found a used Highlander in Warner Robins, said her credit wasn't strong enough to get decent terms. If I co-signed, they could manage the payment just fine. You believed her. I looked at him. My dad was missing work because he couldn't trust his car, Eli. He lifted one shoulder. I'm not judging you, I'm building the file. That made me exhale. Right. The Highlander was a 2019, just under $29,000 after taxes and fees. Meredith had all the details ready, which should have been a warning sign, but back then it just sounded like competence. She'd said all she needed was my name on paper, that the payment would be handled out of their account, that she would never let anything touch my credit. For almost 3 years, it didn't. Then, late last summer, the notices started. Notices, Eli repeated. Plural? I folded my arms. The first one was August. She said autopay got dropped when they replaced a card. September was supposedly a processing delay. November was because the bank switched systems. Then December happened, and she said she'd fixed everything. And January, and now February. He nodded slowly. One random payment issue happens. 5 in 6 months is behavior. That word landed hard. Behavior. Not bad luck, not stress, not a rough patch. Behavior. My phone buzzed on the counter. Meredith's name lit up the screen like it had heard us talking. I stared at it until the call went to voicemail. You're not answering? Not yet. He went back to the laptop. Do you have any proof she ever sent you a statement? I laughed once. No. It was always verbal, always urgent, always emotional. That tracks, he said. I thought about how those calls always went. Meredith never started with the ask, she started with atmosphere. A long silence, a tired voice, some detail about my father's pain, or Savannah being overwhelmed, or one of the girls getting sick, or how nobody else in the family understood pressure the way she did. By the time she got to money, I already felt like I was failing some invisible character test. The next afternoon, one of the women from my mother's church circle called while I was between meetings at Northline. I almost didn't pick up, but I recognized the number from years of holiday potlucks and casseroles. "Brenna, honey, just checking in. Your mama says you're working yourself to death up there in Charlotte." I swiveled my chair away from the glass wall of the conference room. "I'm fine, Mrs. Gentry." "Well, that's good. She always says you don't like to be fussed over. Independent thing, I suppose." It was meant to sound admiring. It landed like a bruise. A few hours later, a cousin texted that same tone in a different shape. "Mom says you're the strong one, so I guess everybody figures you don't need much." There it was again. Not concern, permission. The family had built an entire moral argument around the idea that because I could survive neglect, I should. That night, Eli opened Houston County property records on his laptop. "You sure you want to do this now?" he asked. "No," I said, "but go ahead." He searched the address on Willow Creek Road, pulled the parcel, then clicked through deed history and lien history with the patient focus he brought to tax audits and bad faith accounting. I stood beside him with my arms wrapped around myself and watched my childhood home turn into public record. There was the deed. There was the mortgage filing. There were the tax assessments. Then there was the document that changed the shape of my face, my breathing, my whole understanding of the last 6 years. Mortgage satisfaction filed March 2020. Eli didn't say anything at first. He just moved the screen closer. I read it once, then again. "No." His voice stayed calm. "Brenna." "No," I said again, because March 2020 was 8 months before I started sending money. He nodded. "Which means at most you may have covered a handful of payments before the loan was satisfied. Everything after that did not go to a mortgage." I sat down so fast the barstool legs scraped the hardwood. For a second, I still tried to make it make sense. Maybe they refinanced, maybe there was a second note, maybe I was missing something obvious. But the filing sat there on the screen with all the indifference of the truth. Recorded, dated, final. I picked up my phone and called Meredith before I could lose my nerve. She answered on the third ring with a weary hello that sounded rehearsed. "What's the current mortgage balance on the house?" Silence. Then a small shift in her breathing. "Why are you asking that? What's the balance, Mom?" "Piper's running a fever, and Savannah hasn't slept in 2 days. Your father starts physical therapy next week, and I have more on my plate right now than you could possibly understand." I looked at the screen in front of me. March 2020. "Mom, the balance." Her voice cooled by several degrees. "I don't appreciate this tone. Eli is putting numbers in your head and making you think about family like clients." I stared at the filing. My own pulse sounded far away. I asked a question. "And I am telling you this is not the time," she snapped. "Everything does not have to be turned into a spreadsheet." I ended the call. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just hit the screen and set the phone down beside the laptop. Eli didn't move, neither did I. Outside, somewhere below us, a siren passed and faded into the Charlotte traffic. Inside, my kitchen, the record stayed open on the screen. My mother had not been drowning in a mortgage. My mother had been lying. And whatever she had built with my money, it wasn't sitting on Willow Creek Road. It was somewhere else, filling some other hole in that family, one I had probably been expected to patch for years without ever being told its name. Eli ran the numbers the next morning while I sat at the counter with cold coffee and a yellow legal pad I wasn't really using. He didn't dramatize it, he just worked. Month by month, transfer by transfer, he separated what might have hit before the payoff from everything that came after. When he turned the laptop toward me, the total was still so high it made my stomach feel hollow. Even after we gave my mother every possible benefit of the doubt, it was just under $80,000. I stared at the figure until it stopped looking like money and started looking like time. The trip to Asheville I never took because I told myself I should wait one more year. The one-bedroom apartment I could have moved into sooner but didn't because the extra $400 a month felt irresponsible when home needed help. The couch I kept saying I'd replace, the vacation days I cashed out, the little comforts I called frivolous because there was always some version of emergency waiting in Georgia. I had spent more than 5 years treating my own life like the optional line item. Eli closed the laptop halfway. "You okay?" "No," I said. Then I laughed once, which I guess answers that. He came around the counter and set a hand on my shoulder. "Brenna, this isn't just generosity gone too far. This is a system." That word stuck. System. Not a misunderstanding, not bad communication, not my mother being dramatic. A system built around the assumption that if she pulled the right strings, I would keep paying and never ask where the money was going. My phone buzzed against the counter. "Wade." I looked at Eli, then answered. "Morning, Uncle Wade." His voice came through rough and direct. "You still got a minute to talk plain?" "Always." "Good, because I got a question and I don't feel like dancing around it. Are you really done with this family the way your mama keeps telling people, or is she running her mouth again?" I sat down slowly. "What exactly has she been saying? That you call less every year, that Charlotte changed you, that Calvin landed in the ER in 2024, you barely even checked in?" He let out a hard breath. "And she's been hinting Savannah and Troy are carrying everything on their own, like no one's ever helped them." I looked across the counter at Eli. He was already still. "I send money every month," I said. "I have for years." Wade was quiet for a beat. "Well, that's about what I figured." "You figured?" "Your mama asked me last fall if I could float Savannah and Troy a little something till things leveled out. Said the girls needed stability, said Troy was getting back on his feet. When I asked about you, she said you had your own life now and didn't get involved." It took me a second to answer. "So she took my money," I said, "and told people I wasn't helping." "Sounds that way." I pressed my thumb hard into the edge of the counter until it hurt. The betrayal changed shape again. It wasn't enough that my money disappeared. It had to disappear cleanly, without my name attached, so she could keep the moral high ground, so she could still play the exhausted mother holding the family together, while I played the successful daughter who drifted too far to care. Wade's voice softened by half an inch. "Brenna, I don't know everything, but whatever this is, it is not small." After I hung up, Eli asked if he wanted him to say what he was thinking. "Go ahead." "Your mother needed your money," he said, "but she also needed everyone else to believe she didn't." That was it. That was the ugliest part. I wasn't just an ATM. I was an invisible one. Later that afternoon, Jocelyn called from Perry. She didn't waste time either. "Eli told me what you found." I swiveled my chair away from my desk at Northline and shut my office door. "Then, you know." "I know enough," her voice dropped. "And I need to say this carefully because I work where I work, but the direction you and Eli were looking in was the right direction." I leaned back in my chair. "Have people really been saying that stuff about me?" "Not saying it," she said, "repeating it. Your mom's version got around because it sounds polished. Busy daughter, big city job, doesn't want to be bothered. You know how people fill in the blanks in a town like this." I closed my eyes. Jocelyn kept going. "It's worse than people thinking you're busy. The way she tells it, it's like you think you're better than everybody here." That one hit deeper than I expected. In a place like Perry, there were insults you could survive, and then there was that one. Too good for your own people, too polished, too proud. It could stick to you for years. I thanked her and hung up, then sat there with my office door shut and the analytics dashboard open on my screen, pretending to work while my whole body ran hot. My father called that evening, and for once I picked up with no intention of being easy. "Hey, Daddy." His voice was cautious. "Your mama said you've been asking questions." I looked out the window at the parking deck across from my building. "I have been sending money for this house since late 2020. Did you know that?" A pause. "I knew you were helping out." Did you know why? Another pause, longer this time. Your mama handled the details. Of course she did. He exhaled through his nose. Brenna, you don't have to send more. I told her that before. After it was already gone, I said. You always say that after it's already gone. He didn't argue. That somehow made it worse. Calvin was never blind. That was the truth I kept circling. He just had a way of looking straight at something and choosing not to follow it to the end. Around midnight that same night, I got a text from Savannah. You up? Before I could answer, it disappeared. The next afternoon, she sent a photo of Piper and Lila at the kitchen table, with markers all over their hands and one sentence underneath. Mom says you're slammed all the time, so I didn't want to bug you. I stared at it for a long minute. No ask, no accusation, just that soft little line, carrying all the same poison my mother used with prettier wrapping. Jocelyn texted me later that evening. Saw Savannah at Publix. She looks rough, still posting perfect family stuff though. That tracked. Savannah had grown up in the same house I did, but under completely different lighting. My mother had built a life around keeping her centered, protected, defended, rescued. She wasn't innocent, she had benefited from the arrangement for years, but she also had no idea how to live outside it. By Friday, Eli had the refinance paperwork moving on the Highlander. My rate was worse than it should have been, but I signed anyway. I wasn't taking on the loan because I wanted to save them. I was cutting the cord they kept wrapping around my credit score. After that, I canceled the automatic transfers I'd had going to my mother since late 2020. Then I printed everything. Bank statements, payment log, the property record, the lien release, the mortgage satisfaction filing, every late notice on the car, a clean, dated timeline. I slid the whole stack into a plain manila envelope and set it on the counter. Ely looked at it, then at me. That feels symbolic. It feels overdue. Saturday afternoon, I stepped onto my balcony with my coffee and took a picture of the skyline. Nothing flashy, just the view, the railing, the light hitting the buildings downtown. I posted it with one word: home. The first text came 20 minutes later from a cousin I hadn't heard from in months. Girl, that's your place? Then another. When did this happen? Then my mother. Darlin', come home this weekend. Everybody misses you. I actually laughed out loud when I read that one. Nobody in my family had called me darlin' in years. By dinner, more messages had rolled in. An aunt, a church friend of my mother's, even somebody from Perry I barely remembered from high school. The tone was the same across all of them. Warm, curious, prepared. My mother had already started building the next scene. Eli read through the texts and set my phone down. She's moving fast. She always does. You want to go? I looked at the manila envelope on the counter, at the stack of proof that had taken me more than 5 years to earn and 1 week to organize. Yes, I said, but not to talk this out in her kitchen. He nodded once. Then let's go make sure nobody gets to tell your story for you again. The highway out of Charlotte felt longer than it had any right to. Eli drove the first stretch, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the cup holder, close enough to reach me without making a show of it. I watched the city fall away in pieces. Glass towers gave way to exits, exits gave way to long strips of road and gas stations and billboards promising Jesus, injury lawyers, and peach orchards that weren't actually anywhere nearby. Neither of us talked much. There wasn't much left to say. I wasn't going home hoping for understanding. I wasn't going home to have one more soft kitchen conversation where my mother tilted her head and made me feel unreasonable for noticing the obvious. I was going home like a person carrying evidence into a room already arranged against her. By the time we turned onto Willow Creek Road, the sun was low and the sky had gone pale gold over the pines. I saw the cars first. Not 1 or 2, not even 5. They lined one side of the road and spilled halfway onto the grass near the ditch. A couple more sat crooked in my parents' yard. I counted without meaning to. 12, maybe 13. Eli slowed the car. "Well," he said. I kept my eyes on the windshield. "This isn't dinner." "No," he said. "It isn't." That was all. He didn't give me a speech. He didn't ask if I wanted to leave. He knew I had already crossed the point where leaving would have felt like surrender. When we got out, I could hear voices through the screen door before we even reached the porch. Laughter, plates clinking, a child's shriek from somewhere inside. The front door opened before I knocked. Meredith stood there in a soft blue blouse, with lipstick just fresh enough to say she'd checked it before greeting guests. Her expression landed exactly where she wanted it, warm, relieved, motherly. "Darlin'," she said, and pulled me into a hug that smelled like powder and baked ham. I let her hug me because resisting on the porch would have made me the one who looked dramatic. "Look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. "You made it, and you brought Eli. Good." Inside, the room opened up into exactly the kind of scene she had always known how to stage. Wade sat near the fireplace with Jocelyn beside him. Two women from church I recognized from years of casseroles and Christmas programs stood near the kitchen island. Mr. and Mrs. Gentry from down the road were there too, dressed like they'd come from somewhere just formal enough to matter. There was another older woman from church near the dining table, the one who always sat 2 pews ahead of my mother on Sundays. Savannah was at the far end of the room in a cream sweater, makeup carefully done over obvious exhaustion. Troy stood near the wall with a drink in his hand, shoulders tight. He looked at me once, then down at the floor. Meredith moved through the room like she was conducting it. "This is Brenna and Eli," she announced, as if we were the final guests at a shower. "Brenna's been so busy up in Charlotte, we hardly get to borrow her." "Borrow me?" One of the churchwomen smiled at me. "Your mama says you're doing so well." I smiled back because there are whole towns in the South built on women smiling while they bleed internally. Mrs. Gentry squeezed my arm. "Family still calls you back home one way or another." Another woman added, "You're the strong one. Meredith always says that." There it was again. Strong, reliable, the one who could take a little more. Savannah came over and hugged me lightly. She felt smaller than I remembered, all bones and nerves under soft fabric. "You look good," she said. "You too." It was a lie both ways, and we both knew it. Piper and Lila raced through the room with the kind of reckless joy only little kids and very bad adults can afford. Meredith had the table set like a magazine spread. Heavy serving bowls, good dishes, cloth napkins, candles already lit, photos of family on the sideboard, carefully positioned where every version of us looked close and smiling and normal. The whole house felt upholstered in pressure. Dinner itself was almost worse because it stayed normal for so long. Wade asked Eli about accounting. Mrs. Gentry talked about road construction near downtown Perry. One of the church women asked if Charlotte was as expensive as everybody said it was. Meredith kept dropping polished little remarks into the conversation, how proud she was of my work ethic, how hard I'd always pushed myself, how nice it was that success hadn't changed me. Every line was bait. Troy barely spoke. Savannah did the work of covering his silence with tired little comments about the girls and school registration and how crazy prices had gotten. Every now and then, I'd catch her looking at my face like she was trying to read whether I knew something she didn't. By the time Meredith brought out peach cobbler, my shoulders hurt from holding still. Then she stood. She tapped her spoon lightly against her water glass, smiling around the table like the benevolent queen of some tiny southern kingdom she had built out of recipes and guilt. "I just want to say something before we all scatter," she said. The room quieted exactly the way she'd trained rooms to quiet for her. She looked at me first. "I know everybody here is proud of Brenna," She's worked so hard, built such a beautiful life for herself in Charlotte, and just recently bought herself that gorgeous condo. A few people murmured approval. Somebody said amen under their breath, like home ownership at 30 was a testimony. Then Meredith's expression softened into grief. And because family takes care of family, she said, Brenna has already told me she wants to help Savannah and Troy get through this hard season. The room moved before I did. Nods, smiles, a few soft claps. Savannah blinked hard and looked down. Troy lowered his head like a man receiving charity he deserved. One of the churchwomen said, God bless a family that stays together. I felt the manila envelope against my ribs inside my bag. Meredith turned toward me with that polished, terrible kindness. Honey, do you want to say a few words? I stood up slowly, not angry, not shaking, just done. I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and set it on the table. Actually, I do, I said. The room settled back into silence. For more than 5 years, I said, I've been sending my mother $1,250 a month. I was told it was to help cover the mortgage on this house. Meredith's smile thinned. I pulled out the payment log first, then the county record, then the mortgage satisfaction filing. This is every transfer I made starting in November of 2020. This is the public filing from Houston County showing the mortgage on this house was paid off in March of 2020, which means more than $79,000 I sent after that did not go toward keeping this house. Nobody moved. Wade was the first one to step closer. He took the papers from my hand and put on his glasses. Jocelyn stood too, reading over his shoulder. That's a recorded filing, she said quietly. It's real. Mrs. Gentry looked from the papers to my mother and back again, and I watched the exact moment her understanding changed. Savannah pushed back from the table just enough to breathe. Her eyes moved over the numbers, then to Meredith, then back down again, like she couldn't make her mind accept what it was seeing. Troy stayed absolutely still. Meredith recovered first, because of course she did. This is a family misunderstanding, she said, voice cool and controlled. Breda is taking complicated private matters and turning them into a spectacle because she doesn't understand how much juggling goes into holding a family together. I looked at her and felt nothing tender at all. No, I said, what's complicated is how long you expected me to keep paying while you told people I wasn't helping at all. That landed. I took one breath and kept going. The monthly transfers are over. The Highlander loan has been refinanced into my name alone, so no one in this house gets to use my credit as leverage again, and I am not funding one more lie about me. The room had gone so quiet, I could hear Piper humming to herself in the den. I didn't come back because I wanted everybody here to like me, I said. I came back because the truth deserved to be in the same room as the story that's been told about me. No one clapped now. No one rushed in to smooth it over. Wade lowered the papers slowly and turned toward Calvin, who had not said a single word all night. For the first time since we'd sat down, every eye in the room moved to my father. Wade's voice came out flat and heavy. There's something else this room ought to hear. Wade didn't look at me when he said it. He looked straight at my father. Calvin stayed still for so long I thought he might try to let the silence swallow the whole room. Then he set his glass down on the table with a soft click and rubbed one hand over his mouth. Tell them, Wade said. My father kept his eyes on the table. Back in 2018, the morning of your graduation, my truck wouldn't start. I went over to Wade's and borrowed his. Every sound in the room seemed to pull away from me at once. I was there, he said. I got to Charlotte before they started calling names. I sat in the back. I stared at him. My heartbeat felt slow and violent at the same time. No one moved. Not Meredith, not Savannah, not even Troy. Calvin reached into his wallet with fingers that looked older than I remembered and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn thin at the creases. He set it on the table between us. My commencement program. I kept it, he said. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew I didn't deserve to. My throat burned. You were there, I said. He nodded, once. I was there. Then why weren't you there when I came out? His face crumpled in a way I had never seen in my father. Not dramatic, not loud, just the collapse of a man too tired to hold his own shape. Your mama called, he said. She said Savannah almost passed out, said she was scared, that something was wrong, that I had to come back right then. Wade's voice cut through the room. She wasn't passed out. She hadn't even left the damn kitchen. I turned to Meredith. She didn't deny it right away. That was the worst part. Her expression shifted through calculation first, like she was still looking for the version of the truth that would leave her standing. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart, she said finally. I laughed then, one dry, broken sound that didn't feel like mine. Everything, I said. You mean her party. Calvin looked at me with tears in his eyes that made me angrier than if he had stayed blank. He had been there. He had seen me walk across that stage. For 8 years, I had carried the weight of being unwanted by both my parents in the one moment I had needed them most. And the truth was not gentler. It was just uglier in a different direction. You were there, I said, again, quieter this time, and you still left. He lowered his head. I did. Nobody in that room tried to save him from it, not even me. Savannah was crying now, but not the tidy kind she knew how to do in front of people. Mascara had started to break under one eye. She turned toward Meredith like she was seeing her mother from across a highway. What else have you lied about? Meredith lifted her chin. Don't talk to me like I'm some criminal in my own house. Troy muttered something under his breath. Jocelyn looked over at him. Actually, maybe let's talk about your part too. His head snapped up. Excuse me? You had that reckless driving arrest last summer. Everybody acted like it was some misunderstanding with a checkpoint, but it wasn't, and Aunt Meredith made calls before it ever got around church. Savannah's head turned so fast, I thought she might get whiplash. What arrest? Troy looked at Meredith first. That told me everything. It was handled, Meredith said sharply. There was no reason to drag it through the mud. Handled with what money? I asked. No one answered. Wade did it for them. He crossed his arms and looked right at Troy. Credit cards maxed, online gambling, late notices, then that driving charge on top of it. Your mama's been plugging holes in that house like she's patching a boat with paper towels. Savannah's whole face changed. Not disbelief exactly. Recognition, like she'd been living with a smell in the walls and had finally found the mold. You knew? She asked Meredith. I knew enough, Meredith snapped. Somebody in this family had to. And that somebody was me, I said. She turned toward me with something close to irritation, like I was missing the obvious. You were the only one strong enough to help, Brenna. Calvin doesn't know how to manage money. Savannah has 2 little girls and a husband who kept making bad decisions, and you were fine. You were always fine. There it was, the purest version of it. Not even an apology buried under excuses, just the belief that using me was reasonable because I could take it. You don't hear yourself, I said. I hear myself perfectly. In a town like this, women do what they have to do to keep their families together. No, Wade said. Women like you do what they have to do to keep up appearances." Nobody said amen this time. We left not long after that. There was no movie ending, no collective reckoning with everyone gathered in a circle under soft lighting. Eli picked up my bag, Wade pressed my shoulder once on the way out, Jocelyn hugged me hard and quick. Savannah didn't try to stop me. She just stood in the dining room with her hands hanging at her sides like she no longer knew what to do with them. Calvin followed us onto the porch. I turned when I heard the screen door open behind me. He held the folded commencement program in his hand and passed it to me like something fragile and embarrassing. "I should have stayed," he said. I took it. "You should have." That was all I gave him, and it was more honest than comfort would have been. The drive back to Charlotte was quiet in the way hospital hallways are quiet after bad news. Not empty, just stunned. Eli kept one hand on the wheel and let me be still without trying to talk me out of whatever I was feeling. By Monday, I had done the practical things. I confirmed the Highlander refinance had funded. I updated the auto pay so every future notice would come to me, not through my mother. I called the loan servicer, straightened out the delinquency timeline, and checked my credit report twice in one afternoon, like looking harder could reverse what had already hit. I archived every statement, every filing, every screenshot in one folder, and slid the physical copies into the bottom drawer of my desk. There was something almost holy about paperwork when it finally served the right person. Calvin called the next Tuesday at 8:07. I let it ring once before I picked up. "Hey, baby girl." I hadn't heard him call me that in years. We talked about almost nothing. A transmission rebuild at the garage, rain coming through Middle Georgia, the price of brake pads. He never said he was sorry again, and I never helped him out by making it easy. That was the strange new shape of us. He had to come to me without Meredith's script in his mouth, and I had to stop doing the emotional labor of turning his regret into redemption. The calls got a little longer after that. Savannah texted 3 weeks later. "I found credit card statements. I found enough." I read it standing barefoot in my kitchen. Then another message came. "I think I need therapy, and I don't even know where to start." I leaned against the counter before I answered. "Start there," I typed back. Nothing more. Not because I was cruel, but because I was finally done taking unpaid positions in other people's recovery. Meredith kept texting too. "I did what I thought was best. You don't understand the pressure women are under here. One day you'll see this differently." I never replied. That may have been the cleanest consequence of all. Not the papers, not the room going silent, not even her losing control of the story in Perry. It was that she no longer got to reach into me with a sentence and rearrange my entire nervous system. A month later, I hung my diploma in the hallway outside my home office. The frame sat on the floor for 2 days before I worked up the nerve. It felt ridiculous at first, like decorating with an old wound. But when I finally drove the nail in and stepped back, it didn't look like grief, it looked like proof. I put the folded commencement program Calvin gave me on the shelf below it. Not as forgiveness, not as a memorial, just as evidence that the story I had carried for 8 years was wrong in one crucial way. He had been there. He had failed me anyway. Both things were true, and I was done shrinking the truth to make it easier to hold. At night, Charlotte still glowed outside my windows. The condo still felt expensive and earned and quiet. My condo, my mortgage, my name, my groceries in the refrigerator and my dishes in the sink, and my life arranged by choices that belonged to me. It wasn't the fanciest place I could have imagined back when I was 23 and living in a studio with one hot plate and a mattress on a frame I assembled myself. It was something better than that. It was the first place no one got to use me to keep their chaos upright. That was the thing I had been wrong about for years. Home was never Willow Creek Road, not really. Home was where I had been raised to understand everybody else before myself. Home was the place where I no longer had to pay for belonging with my dignity. If you've ever been the strong one in your family, the reliable one, the one everybody calls because they know you'll absorb the hit, then you already know how easy it is for love and obligation to get tangled up until you can't tell one from the other. And if you've ever had to decide whether silence in a family is peace or betrayal, I'd really like to know what you think. What would have hurt you more, the money or the years of being turned into the villain while your help stayed invisible? And if this story stayed with you, stay with me a little longer. There are more stories here about the kind of betrayals people hide under nice tablecloths and polite smiles, and what it takes to walk away with your name intact. I didn't get my old family back. What I got was better. I got the truth, my money, my own front door, and the right to stop being useful to people who never learned how to love me without taking from me first.